Good evening. Good evening. Come on in. Good evening. I hope you are doing well. Welcome to this session, part two, the art of outdoor worship. Happy Monday to you, all of you who are watching from wherever you are. And I thank you for joining me for another session to help with church technology. We're going to be focusing on some technology tools as it relates to helping to enhance the outdoor worship experience. Many of you have asked questions, and so I've taken those questions and have worked to put together some information that will help the body of Christ to enhance what they are doing as it relates to outdoor worship, as many churches are transitioning back into the physical worship space. For those of you who are joining me for the first time, my name is Timothy Farmer, and I have the great pleasure of serving you as it relates to church technology. Please feel free to share this broadcast with others. I will be addressing some questions in the chat as we go along to ensure that you have the information that you need in order to be successful as it relates to outdoor worship. I do invite you to follow Farmer Tech Group on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. We are broadcasting in those areas as well. For those of you who are watching on Instagram, please feel free to let me know. We're trying something a little bit new with the Instagram audience. So just let me know that you can hear me well and see me well for this broadcast on tonight. I want to thank all of you for your support as it relates to some of the other broadcasts that have been taking place, both in this space as well as on some of the other social media platforms that I've been blessed to participate as it relates to sharing things to help with technology for the church. So with that being said, we're going to dive right in. Again, those of you who are coming on, we are exploring even more in this part two session on the art of outdoor worship. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or just give your church a shout out and we will be sure to acknowledge you. So last time in this session, we covered some basics as it relates to outdoor worship. I'm a firm believer that even before you add technology tools into that which you do to enhance the service, there are some basic things that you have to do, whether it's an outdoor service or even as many are transitioning back into the building. And even for virtual worship, there are just some basic best practices that aren't necessarily technology related, but they're just good to know. And so we explored some of those things last time as far as testing your equipment, making sure that you have enough volunteers, make sure that there are multiple ways for people to engage with others in the worship service. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into some things that will help to support your ministry as it relates to technology. So if this isn't your lane, please share it with those who would use this as a part of their lane in the ministry work of your church. So with that being said, we're going to connect into some things that I believe would help your ministry backpack for both technology best practices for outdoor worship, as well as some technology tools around just church technology in general. So the first thing that I want to dive into, and you might have heard me say this before, but I always like to reiterate this because especially if you are streaming your worship service, if you are, no matter if you have a large budget, a large ministry, or you are a small ministry and you are trying to get things up and going related to outdoor worship or just physical worship in the building, you always want to make sure that you test your internet speed regularly. Don't take for granted that on Saturday everything worked well and that everything on Sunday will work well on that day. You just never know what might be happening in that area. And if you don't have multiple internet providers coming into the space, you always want to make sure that you test your internet regularly. And many of you are already doing this. This is done through a site called speedtest.net, where you can go online and you can run an internet speed test to make sure that you have the right bandwidth to stream your worship service for outdoor worship or for inside of the building. And you always want to make sure that you have an upload speed of 20, and the unit of measure is megabits per second. So even if the megabits per second part is French to you, just focus on at least the 20 that is going out from your internet speed. You will always get a higher download speed, but most providers will give you a lower speed, and you want to make sure that it is at least 20 megabits per second that is going out once you do that test. Do that the first thing in the morning or the day of your particular event. So always make sure that you are running a robust internet speed. And if you are getting that 20 megabits per second, then you might want to connect with your internet provider to ensure that you are getting that speed and see how you can increase it if it is not. So for outdoor worship services, people need to have a way to connect to the audio for them to hear adequately, whether it's from their cars or if many ministries now are having people to sit outside. If they bring lawn chairs to the premises, then they can sit outside and they can listen to the audio. However, for the ministries who are encouraging people to stay in their cars, you want to make sure that you use an FM translator to broadcast the sound. What is an FM translator? And in some cases, many people call it an FM modulator. An FM translator is a device that's hooked to the audio system, to the soundboard. It's a small device that will broadcast the sound of the worship event through an FM signal in a person's car. So they can turn to a dial that you give them, and they can listen to the audio in their car, and that will increase the engagement of the members or the visitors in that space so that they can hear and also view and enjoy the service, to ensure that they're not just sitting in their car and they can't hear anything, but an FM translator or an FM modulator will help to ensure that people can hear. With an FM translator or an FM transmitter or modulator, and most of the persons who work sound, if you're a sound engineer or if you have a sound engineer for your church, is to have them to research, if they're not already using, the best FM translator or transmitter or modulator that will work best for the ministry of the church. And a best practice for that FM translator, I keep saying translator, transmitter, is to have the dial, the number for people to listen to the service at least an hour before service happens. Why? Because many people get to the campus at least 30 minutes ahead of time, if not more, and to provide that to the volunteers. So as they are coming onto the premises, those who are coming for worship, they will have the dial to be able to listen to the service, especially if your ministry does a pre-service, or if you do a countdown, or if announcements are given beforehand, then they can have that dial well in advance in order to enjoy the service. Good evening, brother Craig Moore, brother Gregory Cooper. Thank you for joining in tonight. And again, those of you who are watching, others, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. So in addition to an FM modulator, then you want to make sure with that audio that is broadcasting the service from the soundboard, or if you're using an amplifier, you want to make sure as best as possible, if you are streaming or if you are recording that service, is to get the audio into the camera feed for the stream. What does that mean? That means if you are recording with a camera and streaming, you want to try as much as possible to get the audio directly from the soundboard into the feed that people will watch on stream. One of the ways to do that, there are a couple of devices. One is called an audio interface. Write that down, an audio interface that will allow you to connect the soundboard to your cameras. If you're using an iPad to be able to use as a camera, then you can connect an audio interface. So that way, when you're streaming, you're not getting a lot of the outside noise that might be happening, the birds chirping or people moving equipment. You want to make sure that you have a nice, clean audio experience so that way the people who are watching on stream will enjoy it and be able to hear it just as well as those who are on site. And that is done by using an audio interface to connect the audio into the camera feed. Two name brands that come to mind for audio interfaces. And again, if this isn't your lane, share this with who your audio person is. One is called Focusrite, Focusrite. They make audio interfaces and they aren't very expensive. And another one is called iRig, the letter I, R-I-G. Both Focusrite and iRig make simple, inexpensive audio interfaces to connect a cord from the soundboard to the camera or the iPad that is broadcasting the service. So you want to make sure of that because that's very important. Another important element is when you're working a camera or there is a person who is working the camera for the service is to try as much as possible. If you have more than one camera or access to more than one camera, try to use as many shots as possible in order to give your video some diversity. Meaning, if you have two cameras, try to use one camera in the center as your main camera and also a side camera where you can get close-up shots of the pulpit, or you can get reverse shots of the people who are parked in their cars. And a best practice when it comes to using more than one shot, and I know some are just getting started with one camera, but I would encourage to make sure that you build on that as much as possible, or at least have that in your budget for sometime in the future to have more than one camera to be able to capture a secondary shot. And also it's just a good practice just in case something happens to that main camera, you have an additional camera to work with. And when you're doing multiple shots, you want to be careful of the length of the shots, the side camera shots. Your front camera is your main camera, and your side camera should only capture shots that are maybe 5 to 10 seconds long, then come back to your main shot. I've watched several parking lot services, and I'll see the side shot up for 3 minutes, and then we're missing information or content that's happening from the main camera that should be focused on the video feed at that time. Don't let the side shot stay as the primary or a lengthy shot. Just let it be for about 5 to 10 seconds and then switch back to your main shot just to give some diversity. So as the people are watching, not only will they see what's happening on the stage or in front, but they'll see what's happening around in that space for your outdoor service. Now, when it comes to sound, a good way, if you have multiple speakers, a good way to make sure that the sound is well-rounded and people can hear, especially on the campus. And if you're not using an FM transmitter for people to listen in their cars, a good best practice is to have monitors both high and low if you can. So if you have a stage that's elevated, try to have some at the base of the stage and then have some on the ground. Or if you have mic stands where you can elevate them on the stand, then have some at the bottom too. And that way you have sound that will be more surround versus just high or low, but you're giving some diversity to the sound. So in addition to, and speaking of monitors and speakers, there's nothing like being in the midst of a service, an outdoor service, and you see the cloud hovering over and some drops begin to fall. And as far as the protection of your equipment, there's nothing in place to make sure that if the skies open and the rain falls, to make sure that the equipment is well protected. So to make sure that you are well protected and ready for inclement weather, or if you have a parking lot service planned and it's already raining the day of that morning, then you want to have ready to go plastic, and you can get large plastic from Home Depot or Lowe's or any type of hardware store that you can use to cover up your equipment for inclement weather. You can still use it, but just have the monitors covered, especially if the monitors aren't under a covered stage. So you can always be ready to pivot and make sure that you can cover your equipment during the time of which you are having a outdoor service. So if your service has screens, if you're using monitors where people can view the service on a large screen in that parking lot service, one of the unfortunate situations is to have a large screen but have small letters. I've seen that several times. I've gone to and I've watched several services where there's a large screen, but the words are relatively small. So if it's your lane, or if you know of someone who does this, is make sure that the graphics have fonts that are distance friendly. So if people are far back and they need to be able to see the screen, then you want to make sure that the font is bold, that it is a font that is easy to read, not too many words on the screen at one time. So if you have a congregational song or if you have a scripture, you may want to use more slides and fewer words, so that way people who are at a distance can view and clearly read what's on the screen. Another way to connect with people who are watching from their cars, in addition to the FM transmitter, then you can use a tool called Nearpod, and they can even see the slides on the screen on their mobile device. That's Nearpod, Nearpod.com. It's a tool that lets you take slides that are being presented and also transmit them onto a mobile device. Now, I'm giving that one away for free, but I might charge for that advice tomorrow. So just remember Nearpod, Nearpod.com. So keeping the words large on the screen. And for those who are on the praise team or who are ministering from the stage or from the front of the stage, you want to make sure that the mics are adequately spaced, meaning that in between each person, of course, for social distancing, but even for the sound, as the mics are adequately spaced away from each other, you want to make sure that there is enough distance and they are from each mic to the other. There's enough space in order that the sound of those mics is heard very well. And of course, to minimize any feedback that might happen. Yes, Leon, not too wordy. Keeping it short and sweet. Very much so. So in addition to plastic and being prepared for what might happen with inclement weather, you want to be prepared for the cord breaking or plugging in the cord and it doesn't work. So you want to make sure that along the way, and I've seen mega ministries struggle with this, or are they in the moment and they have issues, is to always have extra cords handy and extra batteries on hand. Because even though the cord might look like it works, but as you use that cord over and over, and as you move equipment from one place to the other, it's going to have the likelihood of becoming frayed, or it just might stop working. So you want to make sure that you have, at least for each type of cord that you have, then you want to make sure that you have an extra one on hand and have extra batteries if you're using cordless mics or if you're using any type of battery operated device. So for many churches, especially if this is your first time or you're new to outdoor worship and you're not quite sure, or if you've had a power issue maintaining everything on the circuit of the church during that outdoor worship service, one thing that you want to do is connect with your power company that services the area of your church and do what's called a power assessment. They will be able to tell you, based on your church's power capabilities, that you're able to put this amount of these amount of items on the load for an outdoor service to ensure that you're not overloading a circuit. Or if you need to have an additional circuit for the space, if you're using power from the church. Now, if you do have the budget, then using a generator that doesn't require the power of a church is also helpful too. But if you're doing this week in and week out, then you want to know that you're not overloading the circuits of the church by doing a power assessment. So if you're in the Atlanta area, just call Georgia Power and they will assist you in making sure that you are adequately using your power and not overloading it. And then as a side note, then it's also good to have what's called a battery backup. A battery backup is a device that if the power goes out or if it flickers and within 1 or 2 minutes it comes back on, then within that 1 to 2 or 5 minutes, the more minutes you're down and the battery backup maintains the power, the more expensive they are. But if you have a battery backup, that way if the power flickers for however long, then 2 to 3 minutes, then you don't lose any power for your service, for your mics, for your soundboard, or for the streaming equipment, and then the service continues on. That's a good practice both for outdoor worship and for indoor worship. I mean, I've been in services where the power will flicker right in the climax of the sermon, and so we've just attested that to the power of the message. But getting the stream back on was kind of a challenge without that battery backup. So as you plan your worship service and as you host your parking lot service, one thing that's always good to do periodically is get feedback from the worshipers. How was their experience? You never want to take for granted that everything is working well when it very well may not be working well for a member. Identify how well they were able to listen to the service on the FM station. How well were they able to watch the streaming service? Did it come through clearly? Was there any buffering? Were they able to see everybody on stage? If you're using screens, were they able to see the words while they were watching? Were they able to engage in the service through the chat or through ways such as, of course, we talked about last time, honking their horn and being able to wave a colored sheet of paper from their car at the times to which they are acknowledging the members. And that could be done through a simple survey that you can either give on a piece of paper, which I'm very much a person who likes to be paperless. But if you have an email distribution list, you can send out a form through Google and it will allow them to fill it out. And then the person who sends out the survey can get a response and know how the people are engaging to best inform those who are in leadership who make decisions, who could then enhance or put more resources toward that worship service. All right, a couple more things I want to share. Also, for those outdoor services, you're going to need some additional hands. And I know many tech teams have struggled to do multiple things and have more responsibilities when it came to the outdoor worship service. So it's good to get some additional volunteers that can help with the technology needs. In many regards, you're using more space, unlike the worship service or the worship environment in the building. You're using more of a confined space, and that's a space to which you're familiar. But it's always good to get some additional volunteers to just be on standby to replace a mic or change out a cord to help to make sure that that worship service goes smoothly. And lastly, but not least, you always want to make sure that you test and test and test over and over again. I can never stress that enough. Test before and test after, especially if you're moving your equipment from the physical worship space in the building to the space outside of the building on a regular basis. Because by doing so, you just never know what might get loose or might get unplugged, to ensure that you have adequate coverage and your technology is working in a robust way. So with that being said, those are just a few items to which I wanted to share to make sure that you have some resources to support you with your outdoor worship service. We'll continue with this outdoor worship service with a few more advanced technology tools for those of you who may be in the tech ministry or who are doing some advanced things with your ministry as it relates to the outdoor service. So look out for that. It might not be in a broadcast, it might just be in a tech guide that will give you some resources in that regard. Some upcoming technology sessions will relate to virtual vacation Bible school that many ministries are preparing for and trying to figure out how they're going to do it virtually, as well as continuing to provide resources as it relates to transitioning back into the physical worship space and how to do that effectively with technology. So thank you again for joining me this evening. If you have any questions, continue to post them in the chat. Feel free to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Farmer Tech Group. A lot of new things on the horizon. And thank you always for your support and encouragement. Have a good evening.